And now, please welcome our moderator, Max Schorr.
All right, it's great to be here. Good morning, everyone. We are going to start today's session off by welcoming to the stage Devin Bellamy, who's here, and we're going to present him with a Commitment to Action certificate from President Clinton, and we're going to hear his commitment to action. Welcome, Devin. Very nice to meet you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Devin Bellamy, and I'm the founder and CEO of Unsung Heroes, an initiative to recognize college campus workers who are often unrecognized. I started Unsung Heroes at Georgetown University after interacting with one of the janitors in the business school. I learned about his story and learned about his dream of wanting to start his own catering business and how he immigrated from Jamaica to come here for another opportunity. I shared his story on social media, created a Facebook page called Unsung Heroes, and students raised $2,500 to help him start his own catering business. I continue to share stories, and we use social media to bridge the divide between students and workers. As of right now, we've launched to 5 other schools nationwide, including Notre Dame, UNC Chapel Hill, and many other schools. We have 50 schools that we plan on reaching by next June, and we've already raised $10,000 to help workers achieve dreams of going to vacation. We had a bus driver whose dream was to sing in front of a large crowd. We recorded him and hit over 100,000 people on social media, including celebrities such as Steve Harvey. Now we're in the midst of expanding to as many schools as we can. Thank you.
Amazing. What a wonderful project, Unsung Heroes. Thank you so much, Devin. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage our panelists. First, we have Lennon Flowers. Lennon is the founder and executive director of the Dinner Party, which is an amazing organization that uses the format of a dinner party to connect people around loss. And it has been enormously successful since starting, and it's spread all around the country and all around the world. So welcome, Lennon. Next, we have Anndrea Moore, who's the founder and CEO of Black Tech Women. She started it earlier this year, and it's already spread like wildfire through Facebook groups and through networks of businesses and entrepreneurs. Welcome, Anndrea. And finally, we have Peter Hopkins, who's the co-founder and president of The Big Think, which is an amazing organization that for the last decade has brought thought leadership to a more democratized, accessible format and is growing. Welcome, Peter. It is awesome to be here at CGI U. I think all of us have started initiatives while we're pretty young, and we have a lot of interest in people taking action to change the world. And so this idea of seeing the unsung heroes in your work, Devin, and being here with this distinguished panel is wonderful, and also with this distinguished community, because we're excited to roll up our sleeves and take action. Today, we are focusing on how technology and social media can really amplify our impact, and how we don't sort of get distracted by this, but we use it effectively to amplify our impact. So it's a relevant topic. We're going to start with a conversation here with this panel, and then we're going to include everyone here in smaller conversations. We'll report out, and then we'll wrap up the session, but it should be good. So here we are. So I will start with you, Lennon. How did your very simple offline idea become something that's happening all around the world?
Yeah, so the origin story of the dinner party actually begins with this guy to my left. So a few years after college, I moved from the East Coast out to Los Angeles to work at a company called Good, where I was really interested in not only how do you talk about issues that matter, but how do you talk about those issues well and in a way that spreads ideas, not just programs. Within my very first day in that office, I interviewed a woman who was also joining the team, and because it was my first day in the office, we didn't have any big questions to ask. It was like, hey, can we trade phone numbers and become friends as people who are new to the city? A woman, Carla, went on to become a very dear friend, and as we were walking back from coffee one day, she shared that her father had died 6 months before. My mom died while I was in college, and for the very first time in my life, that became a subject and a conversation that I actually was ready and wanted to have, but it wasn't a conversation that was appropriate for the office water cooler. So we had a handful of folks over at Carla's back deck one night in LA, all of whom had lost at that time parents, and all of whom were in their early and mid-20s and felt deeply isolated by that kind of experience. It wasn't the sort of thing that you bring into everyday conversation, even with people that you've known for a long time. And so out of that, it grew a really powerful group of friends without any goals of creating kind of an organization out of that, right? We became more comfortable with our own stories and suddenly realized because of that that we were far less alone than we thought we were. And so as we became more comfortable with our own stories, people came forward with theirs, and dinner parties grew in DC and then San Francisco and then New York, and very quickly we realized it wasn't something that we could do on our own by dropping in and hosting a conversation, but instead, how do you define the how-tos, the principles, the tips that make conversations about things that we otherwise are extraordinarily gifted at avoiding, something that feels safe and, yes, actually good to talk about. So through that mechanism, a lot of the people who, this is a very lived story, despite the fact that it isn't one that gets a lot of airtime or that we are comfortable necessarily sharing on social media, but the way in which it grew was because people became comfortable with that. So today there are dinner parties in about 146 cities worldwide, and a lot of our work has been about growing a host community, connecting people to one another, and telling a story and enabling people to tell their own.
Love it. So from one dinner party to 146 cities hosting dinner parties, and a lot of those cities have multiple dinner parties. And each of these dinner parties is a deeply offline, personal, human experience, and yet social media and our digital connectivity is allowing this rapid spread. I met Lennon before she came to work at Good, she was working at Ashoka. And Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, had inspired me a lot when we were starting Good. And I remember it was around that time where he was starting to pivot from finding the few really transcendent social entrepreneurs who are changing the world to this notion that everyone can be a change maker. And it was fun to see Lennon in that context, have her do amazing work at Good, and then start her own, and she was named an Ashoka Fellow, which was great. And I think so much of what you're doing also, you're empowering people in communities to host this engine for empathy. So wonderful. And Anndrea, so you had an idea, when did the idea first come up?
Yeah, so I started Black Tech Women in March of this year, but I would say the journey to starting the organization started years before. So a few years after college, I joined a big tech company, and there were a few other Black women who started with me. But what I realized is over time, those Black women actually left. They didn't leave just the company, but they left the industry. So they either moved to New York or moved to Atlanta, and they transitioned. And so that's something that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. Why was it that I stayed a little bit longer than them, and then why was it that they left? But years went on. I went to business school. I graduated, and I decided to return back to the Bay Area and back to the tech industry. And I started attending different venture capital events. And in those spaces, I realized that I would be, the only woman of color, the only Black woman there. And then I started seeing data on funding as it relates to Black women who are starting companies. So we're more likely to start a business, but the least likely to receive funding. So Black Tech Women, it's two parts of it that we focus on. The first part is how do we advance and retain Black women who are already in the industry. So these are either early stage to mid professionals who haven't yet reached manager or senior level positions within their big tech organization. And then the other part of it is how do we empower and give resources to Black women who want to be entrepreneurs and who want to get funding, and making sure that they're aware of the different types of funding that are available for them. And so thinking about how did I actually get it off the ground, Having the idea is super important, especially for you guys, is just to start it. So I created the name. I went to Facebook and created a Facebook group and added 50 of my friends who worked in tech, and then it spread like wildfire. So they found the content that I was posting valuable, and they decided to add their friends and their colleagues who were in the industry. And so we've now reached about 1,300 members, and we've also had partnerships with Google to offer entrepreneurship training. We also have a few events coming up where we're partnering with Lyft and eBay, and so it's really taken off the ground. So I would recommend you guys just, if you have an idea, get started, use the free tools that are out there, and it will definitely take off. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Peter, his idea is really interesting. So he regularly is providing thought leaders the ability to reach more people. Today's a college football day, or CGI U, and it's like the biggest college football stadiums. If you filled that with people, he'll bring a thought leader out and they'll post it on social media, and more people will see that thought leadership than filling up the largest of those stadiums. So it's very cool. But Peter, how did yours start, and how did technology help you reach more people?
Sure. So Big Think's about 10 years old. Our mission is to help make people and organizations smarter, faster. And the basic idea is we want to give you access, as if you were at a dinner party, to the minds that can change the way you think, the way you behave, and can help you develop, just a millimeter edge difference in ability to help change your trajectory for the long term. And this idea came in several parts. I mean, it was inspired in college when I was in Boston, in fact, watching Facebook emerge and realizing that there was a huge opportunity to add value to human beings if you could create content that was both engaging and enriching, and that the entire system was not set up for that. It was ultimately set up to deliver fake news, and we're seeing a lot of the byproducts of it. But I thought, no, the real valuable content is the stuff that can really change the way you think and behave. And so that was the initial motivation. Then my one and only other job in life, I was a producer for Charlie Rose on PBS for about 3 years right out of college. And that's where I observed the desperate hunger for among the most powerful and influential people in the world to tell the parts of their stories that are not asked about on CNN, are not asked about on any roundtable discussion. It's the part of their experience that they believe you should know, that they would tell you if you were sitting next to them at a dinner party, but no one ever asks about. And I saw that with so many dozens of world leaders. The best parts of the interviews were where they really looked deeply within and shared something that was profoundly formative. And I realized that at Charlie, this was right around when YouTube was launching, so video on the internet was just becoming a thing. I realized that his system and his methods were not well suited to getting that content. He had to fill up an hour-long show. He was very focused on the news cycle, but that this new medium of online video, which did not have, which was not getting shot out every day, in a regular time slot, that didn't have to have commercial breaks, that didn't have to abide by all of these very old school sensibilities, that this would be an incredible medium. And then I seized on a piece of advice that Charlie himself offered to all the young folks who passed through his show, which was, just get started. Just start interviewing people. People want to tell their stories. So the combination of seeing this sort of shift in video and just the notion that you can, even somebody like him has to start somewhere, got me and a colleague inspired, and we set out to found Big Think. And now, 10 years later, we reach about 50 million content impressions a month. We have an e-learning business that brings the type of content that we create for public release, but sort of specifies it for organizations and helps them deliver digital programs featuring, Bill Nye, Elon Musk, and notable people like that. And I think the lesson, for you guys is that, and one that I would really highlight from my experience, is the network effect is powerful. As you're wanting to build notoriety, turn to the people who are notable in the areas that you're exploring and you're trying to deliver change to, engage them in conversations that matter to them, and understand what they want to talk about, and be a facilitator of that, and use that aggregate. And you'll get many no's, and you'll hit, as you I'm sure already have, you have to, part of the exercise of this sort of networking model is learning to disregard the sting of a no, because you're going to get so many of them. I feel like I have been completely inured to rejection. I just don't feel it anymore, and I recommend that the sooner you get to that place, the sooner you sent 100 emails, 1,000 emails, you've called, you've done whatever you can to get the attention of the people that you need to engage, and done so with a solid value proposition to them that really understands why they care about this issue and why they might want to engage with you, the better. Because once that sting has gone away, the acceptance rate actually increases.
That's true.
So we're hearing about these commitment to actions. We're hearing about these actions. It's fun for me with these great panelists and also with Devin to hear the personal connection almost before the project started of Lennon going through this loss and meeting somebody else and that being kind of a cathartic experience. But the process, there wasn't enough there to help people who were going through that loss. She felt that. She started to do something. What does it mean to be a Black woman in technology and to feel some of those challenges, and then to reach out using free tools and realize you're not alone, and then to really build this powerful platform, and then to be working with some of the best thought leaders through Charlie Rose, but be a millennial and say, wait, there's some ways that we can kind of add to what's happening in this ecosystem. And we're all millennials, and we can all remember what it was like before we had a smartphone in our pocket, and what it was like before we used the internet to figure out something. We have a lot to learn from you. You're the kind of first generation that maybe you can barely remember that, but it's really been there for you throughout. And so we're really excited to see what you come up with and what you do in the world. I think for myself at Good, when we started, we were sort of shocked by why Good wasn't cool. And we wanted to present content that framed, similar to Peter, meaningful topics in an engaging way. And what's so encouraging, I think, that fuels all of our projects is that that type of content is actually what does best on social media right now. And so there's a huge ability to fuel your projects as you find through your own personal experience something that really resonates, figure out how to address it, and then be smart about how to use the tools, free and other platforms. I think what I want to get into is online, offline. I think a lot of the meaningful work that you do happens offline, and then you use online smartly. But I almost want to role play, because it's fun with this audience who's always lived the online space, to think about almost like let's forget about if social media exists. What is the actual experience and the substance that you're creating that you want to use technology to amplify? So let's get into the forget about technology. What's the actual there?
Yeah, well, I think for us, so, it's been really interesting, dinner's trending. It has been for the last couple of years. A lot of people using dinner for something other than just the Instagrammable qualities of, that which is on your plate. But how do we actually use this thing that, by the way, humans have been doing since there have been humans, eating together as a tool for building social cohesion and actually having a fundamentally different kind of conversation. And so I think for us, the way in which the kind of offline-online interplay developed, we had something that people could do, right? And it's not the kind of mythology out there, and something that we were fearful of when all of this got started and actually had a presence on the internet for the very first time was oh my God, are we really about to talk about grief and loss with a group of millennials? No one will come, right? And actually the opposite has been true. It was, flooded in demand, because the reality is it's not that people don't want to talk about serious things. It's not that we're all about banality. I think you hear the kind of consistent thread and pattern across this crew, and it's about what is enrichment and real content, right, and real engagement. And I think that so often, the story of how to use social media and the stories that we should be telling are those that are like super, super reduced to like your 140 characters or less, and like how many cat videos did you manage to like tweet out today, and that sort of thing. And we found that actually like people were really hungry for this conversation. They were just so afraid of doing it wrong, right? And the fear of like, how will I be received and judged? So it was important for us to create something that was beautiful, first and foremost, that they weren't embarrassed to share. And weren't embarrassed to attach to their own story. And then something that wasn't about, like our own brick and mortar spread as a program, but here are tools, here are principles, here are how-tos that we found really valuable, and recognizing with full humility that this is just a teeny tiny part of paint thrown on canvas, and like what is your invitation, as folks in your own community to go forth and, create beautiful, meaningful conversations that tapping into the capacity that every person has, as an individual host, right, which is somebody who likes the act of bringing people together fundamentally and knows how to make people comfortable in conversation, that there's not a
And
science
the
to
basic
that.
frame is 10 to 15 people around a table for one evening.
Yeah. So for us, it's like you can't have a dinner party conversation. I hate like the photos of like your 40 or 100 people spread out at one long, beautiful table, because I can pretty much guarantee that the conversation sucked, right? That actually like meaningful dialogue and intimacy is had with groups of 4 and 6 and 8, right? Yeah, you can do 10, but it takes work. And our real interest is how do you take these experiences that we otherwise don't talk about and use that as the starting point in a relationship, because it kind of cuts through all of the noise and all of like the, like boring stuff that all of us talk about all the time, but we want to get to something real. We just don't know how to do it, right? We go straight to real, and then you can talk about everything else, right? Then you can actually generate real, meaningful community and relationship. But I think that that's oftentimes the thing that is lost when we talk about using technology, and spreading an idea, is that we forget that people fundamentally in this moment in time are profoundly isolated, despite the fact that we're deeply connected to one another. There's so much social pressure around like what is the image that you're cultivating and the story that you're projecting, and a real sense of being unseen and unheard, right? So I think we were able to tap into something that enabled people to use and exercise their own voices and to gather people together to realize that they weren't alone.
And I think that, like, speaking off of that, in terms of being a Black woman in technology, day to day can be quite isolating, right? And so then thinking about events, if your day to day is like that, and then you have, a networking, a tech event that you want to go to, there's another level of fear and anxiety of also being the only one there. So when we thought about our in-person events, what do we want that experience to be? The first round of events, we wanted people to feel comfortable, to feel relaxed. So we created a happy hour in San Francisco and a happy hour in New York, and the description actually said, no name tags, no speakers, no panels, just come out, let's meet each other. I'll personally be there, I want to meet you. And we ended up getting over 100 RSVPs for San Francisco as well as New York, and I think they were free events, right? So sometimes if they're free, some people decide not to come last minute. So we had probably about 60 attendees for both of those. And that was really, really key, because that built the credibility for our organization, so that we wanted to have more professional events and paid events in the future. We had already established that with them. We had established that personal relationship, so that we were able to connect with them. So I would say having that level of comfort and understanding what your community is, what they're looking for, how they want to connect with others is really, really key before you can start your event strategy and bringing the online into offline.
Yeah, I would amplify a through line through both of Lennon and Anndrea's observations, which is you really want to understand what unique experience you can achieve by bringing people together, and offload all the other stuff to your digital communications. This is sort of the same principle of, ending the lecture model, in college. It's, do the one-to-many communications through social, and think carefully about what uniquely can you achieve when you bring people together. Don't make them listen to lectures. Don't make them, be pontificated to. Really ask yourself, what are the dynamics that we can create, and then say, okay, let's use our digital communications as the way of creating a connection to the next time we're together, and to keep the ideas fresh, to keep them active, to keep the conversations and the outcomes of those live sessions alive until the next time you're together. And that's a strategy that we employ. We're primarily a digital media and e-learning company. We do a lot of work that requires us to bring thought leaders to live experiences like this. And so that is always the question we ask going into those live experiences. What can we do that cannot be done online? And it really is a good and helpful guideline.
And on the community side, we heard a little bit about kind of finding the model, doing the events, the free events, the no name tag. Storytelling and digital communication is one of the things you do really well, Peter. What are some of the insights you've learned as to kind of when posting some of your content? What makes it effective? Why do more people watch it?
Well, I would say that particularly in the sort of tricky world we're in of big ideas, which can easily fall flat, and it's not easy to make somebody talking into a camera when you're, seem super compelling when you're, competing with cat videos and the rest. We have done it, I think, by starting with a really clearly defined editorial framework. So for us, we're interested in sharing big ideas. What is a big idea? Well, it's an idea that is significant, so we measure impact in the same way that you guys are talking about. What is the potential of this idea to impact the world? Is it relevant? So of all the people alive right now, how many does it actually touch? Does it actually affect? And is it actionable? That's the thing I think that sets us apart from TED and other of our sort of peer sites that cover this. Is we're really interested in something that can change your thinking and your behavior today, particularly when it comes to mindfulness and positive psychology and a lot of the topics that we cover. So I would say really try to create and give thought to, or borrow or steal, or whatever you need to do, a value system for what you're trying to do from the outset with respect to communications and content, and stick with it. If it doesn't work, adjust it. But having that, because there are plenty of pieces of content. I mean, our content on average gets about 150,000 views per clip. The most views last year was 40 million or something. And so that's a huge variance. And on the low end, we'll get 20,000 for a single clip. So that's what we're dealing with. And the difference between 20,000 and 40 million is oftentimes not something you can predict. I am the worst at, if you look and see what I actually do a very minimal personal social media, but I will share big thing content on my Facebook periodically, and the stuff that I choose to share is generally the lower. So I don't know, and I don't. That's another thing, is that you guys also likely can't know. I would not program to whatever notion of virality that it's an easy, it's very tempting, and there have been many companies that have risen and fallen on that sort of race to faddish social media techniques. And I will tell you, while you may feel dumb in the moment for not doing it, in the long run it will serve you. And if you have a very clearly defined editorial vision and mission for your communications, then you can start to play at the margins with cutting videos in a particular way. If you're seeing a certain type of video on Facebook that's, in terms of its style and packaging, blow up, then you can begin to borrow it. But if borrowing is your first strategy and you don't have anything that sort of anchors you, you'll find yourself getting some quick, easy wins and then evaporating into social media history. So.
Big ideas to action. So we haven't been that interactive in the room, and we're going to, in about 10 minutes, open it up to more discussion. But I'm curious, how many of you actually have ideas that you're already working on, that you're working to bring into action? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay. And then of those a lot of the people, and then how many people feel like they have a big idea, but they're still kind of working on it? So, I don't know. less people there. People, it seems like they have their ideas. Okay, that's exciting. So you have an idea and you want to take action and you want to do quality control over this dinner party community. How do you open it up without letting it get completely out of control?
Yeah, it was interesting. That was our very first tension point in knowing, even from the moment when dinners weren't going to be, hosted by myself or Carla or somebody whom we knew and were in relationship. And the vast majority of our community are people that we will never meet in real life. And so we made a conscious choice that what we were interested in was not professionalizing anything, but humanizing everything. And so how do we take this experience that A, is a shared and lived experience, and B, isn't rocket science, in terms of the mechanisms through which we build meaningful conversation and community, and recognize that there's going to be a full spectrum of experiences held within that, right? So some dinner party tables, and part of what we could do then was to identify those that were really successful and figure out how to lift up the stories and the principles and the practices that they were taking that made that work, and identify where very quickly if there were others that were really struggling to build meaningful engagement, right? Or people had just conversations and connections didn't gel, right? Could we also identify what were the underlying reasons, and how can we troubleshoot with that, and how do we build a peer community of people that aren't afraid when things go wrong, right? It was really important for us. So we have personal relationships with every single one of our hosts. We personally connect every single person to a table, or friends invite them in and that sort of thing. But every person has relationship, and that fundamentally, people aren't going to use your web form to tell you if something's awry, right? If they don't actually trust you, and have that kind of sense of courage to be vulnerable with the questions that they're holding. So I think we chose relationships from the outset and chose a do no harm principle. So what was the very baseline that we needed in terms of screening host and building a community of people that we could trust to have that conversation, knowing that it wasn't going to be the same one every single time, but ultimately that our interest was in culture change and changing the way in which we look at loss and life after, and see our own stories and our shared stories, right? And I think that that's really key too in the way that we think about social media and technology, right? Is so often it's about how do you promote, right? How do you market yourself, right? Instead, what you hear, I think, as a through thread is how do you enable people to self-identify and say, yep, me too, right? And how do you actually create content that is actionable, right? That is enabling content for people to take those steps in their own lives.
Oh, that's great. And I think your platform is a lot about empowerment of entrepreneurs and empowerment also of women in technology. But how does it feel when you go from having an idea to having it be kind of a national thing so quickly in less than 6 months?
Yeah. I would say it's an amazing feeling at first, and then it's also stressful, right? Because I think, because one of the things you want to do if you want to have a national or international platform is you want there to be a level of consistency, but you also want it to be relevant for members that are in other locations that you can't physically be all of the time. So one of the things that I did probably in the first 3 months was to document what the experience should be like in a particular city, and then what would a lead be for that city. So these are local ambassadors for Black tech women within a particular city or region. So outlined what those things were, and then started pinging and reaching out to people proactively at the beginning to interview and have them take the lead role. And then eventually they started coming to us saying, I want to be the lead, I want to be the ambassador for my city, but making sure those guidelines were there for them, knowing that they have a strong baseline of what is Black tech women, what is the expectation of them, but then letting them create that local feel for what their community needs and what their community wants. So I think that's been part of helping to de-stress a little bit and feel like I don't have to be everywhere all of the time. I think a second component is we started getting different press passes and conference tickets for a lot of our members so that they could physically be on the ground at the Facebook Developer Conference or at different speakers and different events, and using them to share their voice and to share their story to the rest of our community and our followers. So what we do is we have them apply, they're accepted, they become a Black Tech Women Insider, and then they take over our Instagram account and post stories. So right now we have a woman who's at the Women Who Code Atlanta Hackathon who's sharing a day in the life at a hackathon, right? And so that's a way of allowing our community and our members to share their story and what it's like to be a Black woman in technology, and allowing us to consistently have great new energetic content that keeps everyone engaged, even if they can't be there on the ground, which a lot of times they can't. So that's a way, really just empowering your community to also help build and drive your mission, because physically you can't be there all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we often talk about the successes, and we have 3 people who've created things that wouldn't be possible without technology, wouldn't grow to the extent they have without technology. They've used technology successfully on the surface, we can see that. But I'm curious about some of the challenges. You talk about the stress, but I think one of the things that we see in successful entrepreneurs is they're constantly course correcting and learning and hitting challenges and adapting. And I'm curious, kind of what's been challenging about technology? I mean, we heard one example there, but what else?
Well, I'll address it in light of the last question.
Yeah.
Big Think is now over a decade old,
yeah,
and has gone through a lot of iterations. And when it started, the vision was it was going to be YouTube for ideas. We launched in early 2008. Everybody was still very high on YouTube, which launched in 2006. And if you could add YouTube to your pitch, you were going to get more money. What we did not realize is that we didn't have the, my co-founder and I, who were both TV producers, really didn't have the expertise to launch a engineering-heavy website. And we contracted with it. We raised funds. We contracted with somebody externally who turned into the hottest digital shop in New York City in a matter of months, and we were then getting bills for like $30,000 a week, which was not. And so we realized, oh, wait a minute, we can't sustain the tech development that you need to be a YouTube, let alone a YouTube for ideas, which involves a lot of getting rid of the inappropriate stuff. And so we stripped that technology off, we reoriented, we focused more on produced content, less on user-generated stuff, but we maintained a pretty robust forum capability, and lo and behold, while the traffic was just climbing incrementally, there was this audience that was growing that were using us to basically create their own community. And all of a sudden, a couple of years in, we had this constituency of tens of thousands of people who had a very different idea of what we were doing than we did, who were our most intense users. They, and they certainly thought they had some affinity to the mission. They were intellectual types all over the world, but they were really forming friendships and having sort of arcane, weird conversations that were not always even relevant to the content we were posting. And so finally, as we made a decision that this is, this thing that has grown kind of off of us is not where we want to go. And it was a painful thing because we had probably 30 or 40,000 people using it every day for that reason alone. But we needed to sort of draw a line in the sand. So I think that you'll find that as you build audiences and you build a community, it won't always be the community that you expect and in the places that you expect, and you have to be prepared for that. And you may at times have to recalibrate and ask yourself, am I serving this community the right way? Is this the community I'm meaning to serve? And then reevaluate the technology that you're using, because that can deeply inform the community that shows up. And ask yourself, what do I need to provide here? What can be done on Facebook and Instagram and other, is that where I want the conversation to be held? And then take a step back when you look at all these platforms in which your communities live and ask yourself honestly, who's here? Like, we have several million followers or subscribers on YouTube, and they are much more misogynist, much more, and we've had to come to realize this, that they have a particularly alpha view of our stuff. They do not look as favorably on female thought leaders, to the point that we have reprogrammed our approach to YouTube to reflect this audience. And it's, and that there is a big tension, because our values are that we want to give light to the most important thinkers, regardless of their gender, regardless of their race. But if you feed it to an audience that's going to be inappropriate to the point of being malicious, then you're caught between a rock and a hard place. And so as a result, we're looking at those numbers. We know who's there. We're looking at the comments, and we're responding accordingly.
So we are going to turn the conversation inwards now to your tables, and we want to have a conversation around where does social media interact with your idea, and how do you think about online, offline with your idea. So we're going to have about 15 minutes to discuss internally, and then we'll have quick sharing out, and then we'll close up. So I believe at your tables, you can either form kind of, I would say, groups of no bigger than 4 would be helpful. So that way we can everyone has a chance to communicate.
Great.
We should join, and we can disperse.
Okay, awesome.
We are going to start reporting out, so if you can conclude in your groups, and Mark will be going around with the microphone. So there's a chance now for the next 10 to 15 minutes to just quickly share what were some of the most interesting things that you discussed in your group. So Mark is going around with a microphone. Raise your hand if you'd like to share out. All right. Here we go.
I'll take one for the team. My name is Grace Ochieng. I'm from Kenya. And our group had really interesting conversations. We all agreed that it's interesting that you guys talked about, first of all, making the content offline and really knowing what you want to talk about before you actually take it online, because I think we live in the age of technology where it's all about get out there, tweet it, get popular, make it viral, So that was interesting. I think one major question that the whole team, we couldn't really come up with an answer, was that how do you convert the likes, the popularity into, because we were talking about our projects in the group, and most of us have projects in really remote areas and rural areas in different parts of the world. So even though you have likes, you have popularity and viral, how do you make that to your project where you have people who are local who don't even have cell phones, who are your customers and your clients? I think that was one question that we couldn't really come up with an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I just would follow up on that, because I think almost all of us in my group that we were talking, our projects themselves don't necessarily live online in a community the way that all 3 of your groups do. So I think we were talking about using social more for getting outside support or funding, but that's not really what you guys talked about. So I think we all would maybe be interested in, similarly to what she was saying, how do you translate that kind of online support that's not directly relevant to your beneficiaries into support that can be beneficial to them.
Hi. So we were talking about our commitments that all really interesting and different, but I really wanted to know, I'm from Dominican Republic, and I have a project where I work with various students from various places in the country, and at the end of the program, it would be cool for them to be able to connect with those students that went through the program in another place and had the same experience and have their projects, because at the end they make their own entrepreneurship projects. And we would like to make a network where those students can share their projects and be able to share ideas, sort of like a CGI U, but with high school students. And it would be cool to like know about ways that they could connect through social media, and like actually meet and have like conversations in person and stuff like that.
Hi, I'm Patrick Brennan. We were talking about how on Facebook, at least, there is sort of this platform for like warfare or debates on political issues, and so how to get past that and then also make social innovation like cool and sort of the social pressuring to like have everyone buy into this idea was one of our topics of discussion.
Hello, my name's Philippe. Instagram's Phil Nice Creative. Yeah, you know, got to use a platform. It was really interesting because I was hearing the members of my table and I was trying to understand what platforms they were using, how they were using it. My question to be for you is just that you started on YouTube in the beginning. Facebook has been detrimental, offline experience, online. But the way that social media is transforming nowadays is just that there's so much information overload.
Yeah.
I made a suggestion. It's just that instead of posting instantly, like instant gratification, why not plan your post like 30 days ahead of time?
Yep.
And then see how you can reach your audience and engage for the 7 days, whether it be Facebook or Instagram, targeting posts or boosting it with people that have similar interests. This is an incredible table. I bet there's more people in incredible tables too. I hope I get to reach and meet all of you. Those are the types of things that I think about. I'm a multimedia specialist in Miami where we have how to build a mass following and creating a template about what each social media platform does, where's the audience, how to engage in that audience, when to post, when not to post, and what strengths those platforms have. Whether it be like Anchor, you can create a podcast for your dinner parties. When you mentioned that was really interesting. I'm like, oh, let's have lunch. Let's have high school students talk about things against each other, and like just in case people fall asleep during the evening. And I love something similar to that. It's like having creatives talking to corporations, like getting a bunch of creatives in a table together and be like, would you visually help this company out? And then create a free podcast and tell the company, like, you have 24 hours to listen to this podcast. And then if you want more, we'll charge you for consultation. So that's about it, I think.
Hi, everyone. I'm Blessing Chukwaja from Nigeria, and my project is based in Costa Rica, where I study. So I have a quick question and a kind of comment. First of all, thank you for the beautiful conversation and talk. I really want to know, how do you maintain your social media platform consistency in your project? Because for us, maybe in my case, as a student, I have so many responsibility, academic responsibility, and also I need to respond to my project. And most times I don't have enough time to keep up with the consistency of my project on social media. And then in order to gain credibility with your audience, you have to keep them updated each time. So I don't know, for your case, when you started, how did you keep up with the consistency in your project?
Sorry, too many chairs here. So my name is Adriano Schneider, and I'm a PhD student in the Department of Bioinformatics. So we work with infectious diseases. And my question is kind of a personal one. It's not necessarily from the group. But I was in a Gordon conference with Dr. Peter Hotez, which is a great vaccine guy. He was an advisor to the President Obama. And one of the questions that I had to him, but it was like a question from a scientist to a scientist, was why we are failing on vaccines, why there is this anti-vax, which has no scientific basis behind, like succeeding. And one of the things that he said on that moment, and I think that's the day that I started using Twitter non-stopping, was we don't communicate as scientists with the society. So since then, I did open like my Facebook page. I created Twitter and everything, and right now I'm like spending money with Facebook trying to get my ads up and get more likes. But the question is, how can we as scientists, like being scientists, not being like on the headlines all the time, succeed on getting more people to like us, to hear our stories, and how can we get more engagement? It's not just like she said, the like, but it's how can we get people to engage with us and follow us. And we don't want to become Kardashians, but it's like, it's kind of like how can we be self-made and not like, actually she said here, it's like not being just backed up by like a huge corporation that decided to take you under your arm and say, okay, now I'll take you up all the way up there. Or is it really necessary that we, for example, since we're here, to have the Clinton Foundation name saying, hey, Adriano, it's a nice guy, here to listen to him. Like, how can we do that? Is it feasible to do like on our own, or we do have to have those big ones? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm so really happy to be here. I'm a Peruvian based in Minnesota. My initiative involves sustainable fashion, fair trade, and promotion of art. And my question will be, how can I keep my audience there where, like, in the fashion industry is more about trends and stuff like that? And, well, if someone is interested in getting to know more about my project, I will be outside at the end. Thank you.
Hi, I think I'm Madeline Mills, and something I thought was really interesting personally was how it's not just about the network that you're using, but the atmosphere you're creating. And I think that's a really impactful way to use your studies and what you're trying to do with your ideas. And something I found really cool from our table is that if it was education we were pressing, if it was an environment issue, if it was something with trying to do a new technology, it was what market are you really trying to reach? And it's not just about the likes and how people that are really following you, but what do you want people to gain from this? What's the effect that you really want to have? And that's the key to networking. That's the key to growing.
Last question from the back.
Hi everyone, my name is Alice. I'm a San Diego student from Canada, and my question is about how all these responsible world citizens can collaborate on so many different projects on social media. So our table was really interesting. We have two groups here that do really cool water-related interventions. And personally myself, our intervention is using dance to make social change. So that sounds totally different, but we were talking about ways to collaborate online, and it seems like if we're using dance as our platform, and we have an audience of people who aren't necessarily, they don't just start out knowing that in El Salvador there's a water sanitation issue. So how can we use our platform, our entertainment aspect and approach to give a voice and have people help them find these different causes that they then might identify with, want to fund, want to volunteer for?
Great, thank you. Gosh, what wonderful questions and discussion. These are some of the most relevant issues, and it's fun to know you're all engaged. We just have 5 minutes left in this session, so I'm going to let each panelist sort of choose a response. Let's try to be quick, and let's do that. You can start, Peter.
Okay, so I'll hit the question of, there was several questions about, my project is not really social, it's not digital, it's not online. How do I think about using it, and using social media in the right way? Social media isn't necessarily a critical tool for everybody. There probably is some way it's useful to everybody, but you first have to take a serious look at what you're doing and saying, which of the stakeholders that I'm trying to reach, is it the recipients of the aid I'm trying to put forward? Is it investors? Is it the general public? You got to identify your stakeholders and then look at each one of those and see if there is a conversation to be had with them. And in certain cases, they're not. You know, the recipients of the work that you're doing may not have connection to the internet. There may be no role for social media there. And it's important to really think about it in terms of a stakeholder model and then calibrating your energies accordingly. You know, what you don't want to do is, as I heard one of the questioners say, you know, I barely have time to do my own project and to do the tweets and to do the, you know, if you don't have, you know, you should not feel that social media is so critical that it should detract from your energies to actually do the thing you're doing. It should only come into play to amplify it, and I think that the stakeholder model and thinking about that really will help you divide your resources appropriately.
I agree with that. I'll take the question that is regards to like scheduling posts, or how do you balance technology with that. So personally, I use Hootsuite. It's pretty old school, I would say. There's better technologies now, but you can link all of your social media accounts and schedule them. You can schedule up to 6 months in advance, something crazy like that. And it'll also help you optimize the time to post so that you don't have to be an expert to know, oh, I need to post at 8 a.m., 8 a.m. Monday morning. It actually will help you with the best times to get the most engagement and also track the data for you. So there's a lot of automation that happens with social media. I think when you're starting out, it's less important, but as you start to build, you'll realize that you can use different platforms differently, share different levels of content across different platforms, and then schedule it and automate it so that it's more, you just set it and let it go. And that way it is engaging, but not from a day-to-day, I'm spending 20 hours on it. So look for those tools.
Yeah, so I'll hit on a couple of questions. I think though, and this was resonant throughout, of how do you translate likes into action, right? Fundamentally, and what's the point of building an online community if it doesn't like translate into impact, right? And I think the kind of question that is so oftentimes lost is, what is the action that you want your community in online spaces to be taking, right? Is your goal there? Is it a funding goal? You know, the dinner party began with an Indiegogo campaign. And that was told well, and a story that was resonant for a lot of different people, and then that birthed an organization rather than a business plan, right? And I think for action taking, for particularly when you're in remote locations, right, we've begun doing things like virtual suppers, right, and means through technology, and it is technology dependent, and I realize a lot of places that are too remote and this might not be applicable, but I think how do you transcend, how do you enable the people within your community to do their own storytelling, right, to be voices to an audience that, you know, will never actually physically be in a room with them, right? And things like, there's something called Zoom that we use a lot now just because it's steady and great for video conferencing, right? But you can record some of those sessions, you can record moments, you can enable, you know, like I love the handing off your Instagram feed to people within your community, right? But invite that folks to share their own stories, which rather than facts, and I think like to the anti-vaxxer world, the anti-vaxxer story was a better story, right? That's the reason that it spread, because it tapped into people's innate fears, whereas on the other side we led with facts, right? But we know enough about social psychology that like facts don't do much, right? Your facts only confirm what your intuitions already tell you, right? So leading with stories of people whose lives have been saved by vaccines, right? We need better storytellers in that world and among scientists. I think about an organization called the Harry Potter Alliance, right? The Harry Potter Alliance works with fandoms, beginning with the Harry Potter fan community, and invites people and teenagers, rather than just telling stories about Harry Potter and writing fan fiction, how do we actually be more like Harry? What is the Dumbledore's army of the real world? And so then they enlisted tens of thousands of storytellers to actually lift up the relationship between stories in the real world and the themes that were lifted up in these books, right? And did everything from like shipping cargo planes of aid to Haiti to actually getting you know, fair trade chocolate into Warner Brothers, like Harry Potter land, you know, and studios, right? Like there are actions that people can take, and I think so often the only action that we give people to do is to like my page, and that's not enough, right? So there is more. People don't feel, it's not that people don't care, it's that they feel powerless. How do you make people feel powerful, and how do you create leaderful organizations and network strategies?
Great. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning. You are a generation, you all here have commitments to action, and you have this technology at your fingertips where you can reach everyone in your community and increasingly everyone in the world. And there are challenges that come with that. We've talked about some of them, but I think we've heard from 3 wonderful leaders in the space who have gone from having an idea and taking action, and they've found ways that technology have helped them scale that. So we appreciate you digging in at tables. We appreciate all the work you're doing in your lives, and we're grateful to have this conversation. When we started this, it was kind of a newer frontier. I remember at one point we started using social media to ask questions, because if you have these questions, sometimes you can ask them, and people would respond. And then the White House, under the Obama administration, decided to ask questions using their social media, and they gave us credit. And it was like we were just a little startup in California, and then we're starting with the White House having two-way dialogue. And I think the point is that this is just the beginning. And your questions are really, really good ones. We could dig in more, but I think keep asking those questions, keep experimenting. Like the panel said, get started. You already have, and we're really excited to what you do. So thank you to our panel. Let's give a round of applause to our panel.